disclaimer, this is going to be either true crime, scary story, anything that I do. Always remember appropriate age, because you never know what's going to be in it. That it might be a trigger. There's usually murder. I try to stay away from too much child, nothing. I don't do too much of that, and I don't get really gory, but you never know. So just appropriate ages, please. Also, since I've been in the woods, I have not had a lot of visual video. I've just done a lot of audio because it uploads so much quicker. I did a true crime for you 4 days ago, and it is still uploading. No kidding. So tonight, we're going to be doing scary stories, true ghost tales. So if that makes you uncomfortable, I have many other videos that you can watch. Standing in the shadows. So when I was very young, I had a group of older friends that lived in my neighborhood, and they loved to talk about the supernatural and monsters, especially when my parents had them babysit me. So when I would walk down the road to my house from the bus stop, all these other houses lived these older children that would torment me with these ghost stories, basically, and monsters that would terrify me. My mother told me it was a bunch of rubbish and not to listen to them, but it was hard not to, because I looked up to them for one. One day after school, I was dropped off by the bus, and I noticed my dog was not waiting for me like she usually did, which was very strange. So I thought maybe there was something wrong with her, or maybe my parents had taken her to the vet or something. But it was actually nothing like this. When I got home, she was just sitting there, staring off into space. As I walked home, I felt a dark figure following me down the street. Now, the street I used to live on when I was young, there were these huge trees in everybody's front yard that anybody could hide behind. And then behind the excited to see me, but not today. Not this day, anyway. She just stared and looked right through me. Now, she was a large dog, and I tapped her, and I said, "Are you okay?" And I think I pulled her out of it. She licked my face and started wagging her little knob. But there was something as I walked past her, and I said, "Come on, girl, let's go get dinner." She stopped and turned and looked behind me. That gave me an eerie feeling. My mother was so annoyed at the kids down the street. She called all of their parents and told them not to be telling me ghost stories. That was ridiculous. I told my father. He just laughed and he said, "Do you want me to go look outside?" I said, "No, it was earlier today." He says, "Well, maybe it's still out there. Let's go outside and look." So he actually grabbed a bat, walked out through the garage, and called my dog, who lived mainly outside. Now, when she didn't come, his voice got a little shaky. As we lived deep in the forest, he walked around the edge, and there she was again, sitting where she was before when I came home from school, staring off into nothingness. He called her, and it snapped her out of it, and he brought her inside for the night. But when he walked in, he had a strange look on his face. And he said, "I'm sure it's nothing. Just, did you think the dog was acting strange today, Jodi?" And I said, "Yes, I did." No, he said. He put the bat down and just said, "Well, I think it's time to go to bed." There was nobody out there, but there was something in his voice that told me he had seen it too. Before, as I was climbing into bed, I said, "Did you see a shadow? A man in the shadows?" And he said, "Did you see a face with the man?" And my dad just looked at me, perplexed and a little apprehensive as what to say. He said, "No, I didn't see anything, honey. There's nothing out there. It's just the woods playing tricks on you." I said, "But I know I felt it, Dad." He said, "Okay, well, I'm sure it was one of the neighbor kids playing a trick on you." And I said, "Yeah." That made me feel better. I mean, I was very young, so when my dad said it was okay, then things were okay. He said, "Let's move on from this. I'm sure it was just the neighbors." But when my mom came home, she was furious. She said I had called the parents and told them to tell their children to stop doing anything to scare her, because I was the youngest on the block. She was so livid. I remember her yelling as I lay in bed, thinking that I didn't want to get my friends in trouble. Since I was so young, I didn't want to look uncool or woods were the deepest and the darkest, and there was no light. We'd enter into the kitchen, and then I went into the bathroom. I was at the sink when I looked into the mirror, and I spotted the shadow. The same shadow, the same figure, the same feeling in the mirror behind me. My heart stopped. I really thought it was going to stop beating altogether. My eyes could not move from the figure that stood there looking at me, I guess. It just loomed. I felt it more than I saw it. As my heart is pulsing, trying to tell my body to take a breath, I couldn't move. I was waiting for it to move. Something had to be done. I started to feel faint. You know, when you get the little black dots that form at the corners of your eyes, and then everything went black, and I fell to the floor. My babysitter came in and picked me up, put cold water on my face, and said, "What the heck happened?" I just lay there and looked at the ceiling and said nothing. It was nothing. It was just my mind playing tricks on me. But she didn't believe me. She had this gift. She could see the paranormal. She said, "I saw him too. You're not crazy. And I don't want to scare you." So, she said, "Look, let's get you fed and ready for bed. Relax. I will protect you until your parents get home. We won't say anything to them, especially your mother. And I will try to cleanse whatever I can." I begged her not to leave my side, so she didn't. So I was done brushing my teeth, and I went into bed, and she was going to leave my room to get to a story from upstairs, which was 2 floors up, and I yelled at her, "No, just make up a story. I don't care. Just stay with me." I could still feel this person looming in the aura around us. She actually spent the night that night. But when I woke up in the morning, she was gone. It was a Saturday. I always slept with my door closed. Always. And she knew that. But when I woke up, it was opened wide. I started to panic. I remembered the dreams I had the night before of somebody looming over me, trying to pull my soul out of my body. So I was a dark, gloomy day in January. We were at the ice skating rink, and my friends were there. And I was buzzing from all the excitement and the cake. Watching all my friends skate around the ice skating rink. And then we had a sleepover afterwards. We went back to my house, and we were running around the house, and my parents were like, okay, girls, calm down. Everybody go to sleep like parents do. So we were all giggly into the middle of the night until finally my friends had fallen asleep. And my eyes felt heavy as I followed. But then, as if out of nowhere, came this hand that pushed me straight up out of my sleeping bag. And staring into the darkness, I started to panic, remembering everything that happened years before. I tried to steady myself, I tried to open my eyes, I tried to say something, but it was this shadow looking into my eyes, staring at me, tall and bent over my head from behind. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was trapped in a strange dream, but yet I was awake. I shut my eyes as hard as I could. I began to think about God and praying for it to go away. I started to yell, but nothing came out of my mouth. I was shaking my head, praying, God, please make it go away. Eventually, my breathing slowed down and I opened my eyes. And it was gone. But the thing is that I started seeing it more and more. It became, when I started the 8th grade, it was like I was running from my own shadow. It became a fixture in my life, always there behind me, stalking me wherever I went, behind lockers in the corner of classrooms, playing with friends, riding my horses, walking my dog, walking through the woods. It didn't matter what I was doing. It was there. I had to ignore it. I was determined that it was just in my mind, like my parents said. But that is when everything started to change. Things around the house would move around in the middle of the night. I started having terrible night terrors. The dishes would fall off the counter when I'd walk past them. My books, they would have pages torn out of them, or my homework would have been, or fall off the top of my dresser in the middle of the night so loud it would scare everybody awake. The first time something fell that hard, my dad came running downstairs, screaming and yelling at me, but I was in bed, staring, sweating, not able to move, paralyzed from a dream I had. He was like, "Why are you doing this? Stop this." But I couldn't help it. I kept seeing this shadow. It came closer and closer and closer. Every day for years, was terrible. Then weird things started happening more and more. Not just the things in the house, but outside too. My mom would get flat tires in the middle of taking me somewhere. When we'd go on vacation, something would happen if I was with them. I became a curse to the family. Finally, my parents accepted there was something wrong with me, and I must have it attached. But by the time I was 17, I had gotten so used to it that I started to have outer-body experiences just to get away. And by the time I was 18, I had left the house. And when I left the house, it followed me, and my parents were fine. I was lying in my bed in my apartment when the bedroom door slowly opened. I expected to see the shadow in the opening, but there is nothing there. Well, that was scarier than actually seeing the shadow. Nothing moved, nothing fell, nothing at all, nothing happened. I sat there all night long, waiting for something to happen until my alarm went off to get up for the day. The only way the shadow ever stayed away was me living in that house, that apartment. I don't know what it was, but I lived there so long that it finally just left, I guess. Then when I moved to my next apartment, I read more and more about cleansing a house and keeping evil away, and how you can attract certain entities into your life. So I did everything I could to free myself of any negative attachments. Nothing ever happened again after that. My door never opened itself again. When I got older, my dogs never saw anything again. I never saw shadows really out of the corner of my eye. And until about a year ago, I hadn't changed anything really. I'd just gotten busy and stopped doing my weekly rituals of cleaning and cleansing the house. I thought it was safe, but nothing will ever make me feel safe. Nothing will make it ever go away unless I just cleanse and cleanse and cleanse. The shadow is still there. The shadow will follow me for the rest of my life. Imagination. Number 2, imagination. It's hard for me to remember my childhood, living at 4264 Derwin Drive. Not only because I was so young, moving in at the tender age of 2, but because the whole time seemed surrounded in the block of memory, I do a creation of a friend. You know, I never thought there was anything wrong with a little imagination, right? Having an imaginary friend. A lot of my friends did. That's what my parents thought, at least. They thought it was an expression of my creativity and would jokingly ask how my friend was doing or set out an extra place at dinner to humor me. She was a blue-eyed blonde child just like me, a little older than I was, and together we would adventure after adventure roam through the house, play inside, outside. It was fantastic. It was innocent childhood fun. But my grandmother, Ellen, didn't see it that way. She would ask, "Don't you think it's strange?" As I was eavesdropping on her and my mother's conversation. Shouldn't she be playing with real kids her age and not some figment of her imagination? In my mind's eye, I could see her big blue eyes, Erica's big blue eyes, filled with sadness as he looked at me and mouthed real. My grandmother continued, "It gives me the heebie-jeebies." And that was final. My mother replied, "It's perfectly normal." "Well, I don't see it that way, and I don't think you should either," she said, with a finality in her voice. A few days later, my grandmother stopped by again. I could tell her mouth was tight and her brow furrowed when my mother opened the door, and she had a handful of papers she had printed from the library. Before even crossing the threshold, she shoved the papers into my mother's hands. I watched as she read her face and turned pale before turning to me in fear, with fear in her eyes. My grandmother had searched our address up and found out something horrifying. Roughly 25 years prior, a family had been murdered in our very own home by an unidentified man that had picked the lock on the back door and broken in, and before the family had known what was happening, he tied them up and dragged them to the family room where the real horrors began. Apparently, he tortured the family for hours with lit cigarettes, knives, gagged them to muffle their screams, cut them, and finally, as the sun rose, he put them out of their misery, one by one, slashing their throats. Then he disappeared into the early morning light, leaving behind 7 bodies. A man and a woman, and the rest children. 5 children. And one of the little girls' name was Erica. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. swore you'd never put it or a door swinging open without cause. It was easy to write off, but my mother always seemed on edge. See, she believed in ghosts and spirits. Unlike my father, though, by the time we finally left the house, 15 years later, believe me, he wasn't so sure. Every night after we turned out the lights and my parents tucked me into the bed, we would hear the creaking of old floorboards in the kitchen. But there's the thing, there were no floorboards to creak. But that's where the back door was located. The back door the man had broken in through to hurt that poor innocent family some now 25 years ago. One night my father swore he heard scraping of metal, like somebody was picking the back lock. He ran into the kitchen wielding a flashlight like a sword, but when he did, the noises simply stopped. It didn't make any sense, neither did the footsteps, those awful pacing footsteps, clear as day. Every time we went to investigate, the pacing feet would cease their movement, and we would be left wondering, scared and afraid. Looking back, I don't know how we were ever able to stay in that house for so long. By the time we finally left, I was a lot older. My parents had both lost weight from stress over the years, and their eyes were permanently encircled by deep purple blue half moons. That place had taken its toll on us, and we were all too happy to leave it behind, especially after what happened the last night I spent there. After a long night of playing video games and pounding energy drinks, I finally crashed, collapsed into bed with exhaustion. I then began to dream. In the dream, I was Erica, sleeping peacefully in my very room, the very room I was sleeping in. Still asleep, I opened my eyes and saw the face of a strange man staring at me. His hair was long and black and stringy, and his mouth was twisted into a sinister, demented smile full of rotten teeth, the ones that were left. He smelled like booze and stale cigarettes, wretched body odor. As he reached for me with a dirty, cut-up, gnarled hand, I started to sweat and panicked. He yanked me from my bed by my throat to drag me to the family room where my parents, no, Erica's parents were already bound and gagged, crying, trying to kick, but were unable to. What I experienced next, I would prefer not to talk about. What I will say, though, it was unthinkable, unfathomable what they went through. The terror, the pain, the fear was unthinkable. When I woke, there were tears streaming down my face. My entire bed was soaked with sweat. I jumped out of bed, and at the foot of my bed is a shadow of a little girl, my friend Erica. I couldn't keep the tears from falling as I looked at her. "I'm so sorry," I whispered as I passed by her. As I passed by, she turned to me and said, is free to play wherever she pleases now. It's hard with the logical mind to make sense of what occurred there, the things I saw and experienced, but I know one thing's for certain. If I ever see that man with his rotting teeth and stringy black hair, I'll make him pay